It was just another regular day for Jason as he walked into one of his own stores. Little did he know, a racist store manager would soon make a huge mistake that would change everything. Jason, a successful businessman, was no stranger to hard work, but what he didn't expect was to be treated like an outsider in his own establishment. The manager, noticing Jason's casual attire and unfamiliar face, immediately assumed he didn't belong. Without hesitation, the manager called the police, accusing Jason of shoplifting. But what he didn't know was that Jason was not just a random customer, he was the very owner of the chain. As the situation escalated, Jason remained calm, unsure of how things would play out. Would the manager realize the terrible mistake before it was too late? Or would Jason be forced to confront the prejudices that led to this absurd chain of events? Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you stunned. How will Jason handle this shocking situation? And what will the manager do when the truth comes to light? Keep watching to find out how one moment of ignorance turns into a lesson no one saw coming. Jason had worked hard to build his business from the ground up. Starting with a small loan and a vision, he expanded his store chain over the years, and now his name was synonymous with quality and customer care. He prided himself on creating a company that treated everyone with respect, employees and customers alike. But today, in this particular store, he was just another face in the crowd. The manager, who had been with the company for a few years, had no idea who Jason was. As the manager eyed him suspiciously, Jason could feel the tension rising. The uneasy glance, the way the manager kept looking him up and down, it was clear that something wasn't right. Jason tried to ignore the feeling and just enjoy his visit to the store, but soon enough, the manager approached him, asking if he needed help. It seemed harmless at first, but then the words started to sting. "You know, we have security cameras," the manager said, almost as if daring Jason to do something wrong. Before Jason could respond, the manager had already turned away to make the call. It wasn't long before a police officer arrived. Jason couldn't believe what was happening. His pulse quickened as he thought about what this could mean. Why had the manager acted this way? What was the real reason behind his sudden suspicion? The answer would soon reveal itself, and it wasn't something the manager could have ever predicted. As the officer approached, Jason felt his heart race. He remained calm, but inside, he couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. How had things escalated so quickly? He had never been treated like this before. In all his years of business, Jason had always prided himself on treating everyone equally, regardless of who they were. But today, it was clear that the manager's assumption had nothing to do with his actions and everything to do with his appearance. The police officer looked at Jason and then at the manager, who was standing by the register, clearly flustered. "What seems to be the problem?" the officer asked, his tone polite but cautious. The manager explained his suspicions about a possible theft. Jason was caught off guard. Was the manager really accusing him of shoplifting in his own store? He could feel the weight of the accusation hanging in the air. Jason tried to speak, but the officer interrupted, suggesting they step outside for further discussion. The manager's eyes followed them as they walked to the front, his expression filled with uncertainty now that the situation was clearly out of his control. Jason felt a sense of frustration build. He was used to handling stressful situations, but this was something else. Why hadn't the manager recognized him? Why hadn't he thought twice before jumping to conclusions? As the officer stepped away to make a call, Jason couldn't help but wonder what had been going through the manager's mind. Did he think all customers could be so easily dismissed based on assumptions? Or was this just a case of racial prejudice, a quick judgment that seemed to have no place in the world Jason had worked so hard to build? The thought gnawed at him, but the bigger question lingered. What would happen when the truth came out? Jason stood outside the store, the cool air doing little to calm his rising frustration. His mind raced, thoughts spiraling as he wondered just how far the manager would take this. How could someone in a position of responsibility act this way? What kind of person would assume a customer was guilty without a second thought? His pulse quickened with each passing minute. The officer, now on the phone, seemed oblivious to the tension that was simmering beneath the surface. Jason fought the urge to confront him directly, but he knew this wasn't the time. Every second felt like an eternity. Jason could feel the manager's eyes on him from the store's glass doors, but he didn't dare look back. He didn't want to give the man the satisfaction of seeing how much this was bothering him. Instead, Jason focused on the bigger picture, on the implications of what was happening. This wasn't just about him. This was about the values he'd built his company on. If word got out that one of his managers had acted like this, it could ruin everything. The officer ended his call, walking back toward Jason with a serious expression. "We've run your details," the officer said, his voice flat. "We're going to need you to stay put for a moment." Jason's stomach dropped. What did this mean? Why the delay? He could feel the weight of the officer's words like a heavy cloud hanging over him. His mind raced. Would the manager finally realize his mistake? Would Jason's identity be revealed, or was he about to be dragged deeper into this mess? Behind him, the sound of footsteps drew closer. He knew who it was before the figure even reached him. The manager was coming to face him, and Jason could see the regret already starting to creep into his face. Would it be enough? Would it be too little, too late? The silence between them grew deafening as Jason turned slowly to face the man who had put them both in this situation. As Jason turned to face the manager, a shift in the air made him pause. There was something off, something that wasn't quite right. The manager had stopped in his tracks just a few feet away, his face pale, but his eyes weren't filled with regret. Instead, they were wide with something else. Fear. Jason's stomach tightened. What was going on? Before Jason could say anything, the officer stepped forward and handed the manager his phone. "Sir, I think you should take a look at this," the officer said in a tone that made it clear this was more than just routine. The manager took the phone, his hands shaking as he stared at the screen. Jason couldn't see what was on it, but he didn't need to. He knew something big was coming, and it wasn't going to end the way anyone had expected. The manager's eyes flicked from the phone to Jason, and for the first time, Jason saw true fear in the man's eyes. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Jason's mind raced. Had the officer discovered something about the manager? Was there something deeper at play? Just then, the phone buzzed and the officer, glancing down, raised an eyebrow. "Sir, there's been a new development," he said. "We've got a report from corporate." Jason's heart skipped a beat. Corporate? What could that possibly have to do with any of this? The officer turned to him, his expression now completely unreadable. "Mr. Miller, it seems your manager here isn't exactly who he claims to be." Jason froze. The manager, his own employee, wasn't who he appeared to be. The shock hit like a ton of bricks, and the tension in the air skyrocketed. What had the officer just uncovered? What could possibly make this situation even worse than it already was? Jason's mind raced as the officer's words sank in. Not who he claims to be. What did that mean? He felt like the ground had shifted beneath him, and the world around him had become a blur. The manager's face flushed a deep shade of red as he struggled to respond, stammering incoherently. But Jason couldn't focus on the manager's disarray. His attention was fully on the officer now, who was holding the phone with a stern expression. "Mr. Miller," the officer said slowly, "it appears that your manager here is not only unaware of your ownership of this store chain, but he's also been hiding something much worse." He handed Jason the phone, and for the first time, Jason saw the screen. It was a news article, one that detailed the manager's past. The man standing before him, the one who had called the police, had been fired from multiple jobs due to accusations of discrimination. He had a history of racially profiling customers, but even worse, the article hinted at an ongoing investigation into his behavior at another company. Jason's stomach churned as he realized the gravity of the situation. The manager finally spoke, his voice cracking. "It wasn't supposed to go like this. I didn't know." But before he could finish, Jason's phone buzzed. The message was from his HR department. "We've received an anonymous tip. One of our managers has been caught on camera making racist remarks to customers. "We need you to handle this immediately." Jason's eyes widened. The message was referring to this very store. It was happening right now. As the manager stood there, clearly unraveling, Jason's phone buzzed again. A second message popped up from the corporate office, with pulling the manager's credentials. "Effective immediately. You're in charge of the store from now on." It wasn't just about the manager anymore. This was bigger. Jason's own company was now in the spotlight, facing scrutiny for allowing someone like him to be in charge. His phone continued to buzz with messages from other departments. There was no turning back now. And then, just as Jason thought things couldn't get any more intense, the manager dropped his head, muttering, "You never should have come here today." Jason didn't understand at first, but then, as the police officer began asking the manager questions, it became clear. The man had been sabotaging the store. He had been secretly selling inventory and pocketing the money, using the tension between him and customers to cover his tracks. Jason was left speechless, the betrayal so deep it cut through everything he had worked for. The manager wasn't just a racist, he was a criminal too. The store, his business, had been a pawn in a much darker scheme. But just as Jason thought he could breathe again, another twist unfolded. The officer turned to him, his tone sharp. "Mr. Miller, there's one more thing. We found something else in his possession. A list of employees' names." Jason frowned, confused. "What's this about?" The officer's eyes met his with an unsettling look. "You'll want to see it for yourself." As Jason looked at the list, his blood ran cold. On it were names of employees he had never met, names that weren't on his payroll, names that made him question everything. The manager had been running an underground operation right under Jason's nose. Jason stared at the list of names in disbelief. The realization hit him like a freight train. This manager had been running a secret operation, using his position to recruit employees for illicit activities. His betrayal went beyond just racism. It was a calculated scheme to undermine the business Jason had built. The officer confirmed that the manager had been funneling employees into a network, siphoning resources, and exploiting the store's operations for personal gain. Jason's head spun as he processed the full scope of the deception. He'd always believed in giving people second chances, but this was a wake-up call. Trust was fragile, and even those closest to the business could hide dark motives. The officer arrested the manager on multiple charges, and Jason knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He would have to rebuild the trust that had been broken, both with his employees and with the public. As the situation calmed and the store was cleared, Jason took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. This incident had shaken him, but it had also taught him something invaluable: the importance of vigilance, of being aware of the things happening beneath the surface. Jason looked around the store one last time before heading out, determined to move forward. There was still much work to be done, but now he knew just how far he was willing to go to protect everything he had built.